Okay. All right, so here we are at a wonderful another happy hour, Kipaipai Happy Hour. And if you will all go ahead and mute yourselves, we're gonna let Laurie Sumiye give her presentation. We're super excited about it as she's typing away.
Yes, so that's the referral link, so you get $5 off for the glasses. In case you want to get the same glasses I'm wearing, but they have some cool rainbow ones.
All right, you want to start, Laurie?
Sure. All right, I'm gonna just turn on my Keynote.
Go ahead and share, you can share screen, yeah.
All right, can you all see that?
Yep.
All right, okay. So thank you all for being here. This is kind of like a artist presentation / curatorial presentation. I was very much interested in kind of using a specific artist as a jumping off point for my curatorial assignment. And I got really kind of deep into the research, which is why it took me such a long time, because I wanted to read all these books before I curated the show, the exhibition, the theoretical exhibition, and it's titled God is in the Details with a lowercase g, a search for spirituality in contemporary art. And I kind of wanted to start with this image. It is the Sistine Chapel. I got to visit there when I studied in Italy as an undergrad. And the most famous part of this museum, or this room, is actually the ceiling. And I remember being really surprised that that the last part, where normally when anyone would think to decorate is the ceiling, ended up being the most famous part of the museum, of the art piece. I really got to thinking, there's many periods of art where almost all of the commissioned artwork is somehow tied to religion and somehow tied to the architecture of that time. And I started meditating on that, and then I was really interested in researching this artist named Hilma Af Klint, and she is a Swedish artist and researcher. She was an early innovator of abstraction, modernism. She had a really popular show at the Guggenheim in New York, and I was really fascinated by the fact that maybe she was the first abstract artist. And as I was reading about her, she was a very spiritual person who a lot of her work, and especially her best known pieces, were driven by her interest in mediumship and spirituality. And because I was super obsessed, I actually I read her notes. Because she did a lot of writing as well as research, but she was also kind of like interested in physics and biology and astronomy. And so all these kind of scientific and religious ideas ended up being put into her work, which I found was really fascinating, because I'm someone who loves science, and I put a lot of that in my work. And I'm also very moved spiritually by Hawaiian spiritual practices that are related to plants and animals in Hawaii. And as I was researching her, I was really struck by the fact that she doesn't use a lot of religious iconography in her artwork. This is one of the few paintings I could find that there is like a cross that explicitly has a spiritual symbol, but most of her work is very figurative, very abstract, a lot of colors and shapes. And I love this quote by her: "I am so small yet and so insignificant, yet within me wells such aware that I have to move forward." So she kind of speaks in these very symbolic languages, as well as coded uses of color that come from her spiritual mediumship. And I, as much as my work is not necessarily like directly influenced, just the fact that she treats her spiritual practice as much as she treats her scientific practice was also very fascinating to me. And just some of the colors and the shapes and the sort of sense of this universal energy and power. I mean, the fact that she made these images such a long time ago, and then was completely dismissed because she was a woman and doing work that didn't follow the trends of her time, was also very fascinating. And of the pieces that I was really interested in is the series called Paintings for the Temple. And these were very explicitly came from her mediumship experiences. And she had a group of 5 women that did mediumship in these circles. And she was told to make these paintings from this spiritual power that was named. And she produced these huge, huge paintings. that remained in 1906 to 1915, which just blows my mind that she was making these kinds of paintings in this period, and very explicitly spiritual paintings. And the way I kind of thought about how does this relate to what we're doing now as artists? How do we think about what we do is where, you know, where does our inspiration come from? Where do we think about these ideas of what we want to say? And she made these paintings, you know, as if she was channeling from this higher power. And it's interesting that the writing about her, the critical writing, really doesn't talk explicitly about the fact that she treats herself as like literally a medium who is channeling a higher power and making the work by command by this, you know, force. You know, most people just talk about her as being an innovator in expression, abstraction. And I thought it was really fascinating that she had this very specific temple in mind that very much resembles the Guggenheim, and that she explicitly did not want people to see the work, nor did she want to sell any of it. So she had a very she didn't want anyone to own the work because it had like a spiritual message that she felt she had to, you know, maintain. And the people who took over her paintings after she died, she put in the will that they couldn't separate the collection, and had very specific rules. So the fact that the building that she envisioned for these paintings ended up looking a lot like what the Guggenheim is. She wanted it was like a spiral building, is totally like crazy and amazing that she envisioned a building that actually was where it was exhibited. And one of the people who had written about her is that she is using spirituality in this really non-religious, you know, traditional religious way, and that the interpretation of our contemporary eyes onto her work is very about the essence, right? And this idea of abstraction is also about essence. It's very much about the sense of energy and the sort of purity of like making something even simpler. And I thought those combination of spiritual essentialism as well as, you know, just visual essentialism was super, super interesting. And so I came up with this idea of thinking about how we were creating art in contemporary times, which is very much not about religion and the church anymore, as it was in medieval times, or even in Asian art, or the Renaissance, where a lot of these Renaissance masters were working for churches and making spiritual art for those audiences. What is the spiritual of our time and culture within this very materialist, capitalist, secular world that we live in, especially in the art world, where it's almost taboo to talk about a religion or spiritual unless you're, you know, critiquing religion as an institution. Because I don't see a lot of exhibitions that talk to that in contemporary art. It's always in the guise of historical or Asiatic art. And so I was thinking, well, how do we can take a reinterpretation from this, you know, spiritual purpose of art, whether it's being inspired by something that's a higher power that isn't explicitly a named deity, or you know, this idea that there's this invisible world that we look at as being scientific, but, you know, as artists, can we think of the invisible world in these terms that aren't necessarily, you know, conceptual in the very typical way that we talk about contemporary art. And so I selected 5 artists from the Kipaipai group that I thought could represent those ideas, where we're talking about spiritual without saying my work is about being spiritual. You know, what does that look like? What could that look like? And whether the artists who I selected feel like their work is explicitly or implicitly spiritual, I almost didn't care. It was like, well, I see spirituality in their art, and I'm curious how they would sort of respond to the prompt that I would give them. And so there's a building that I visited in Brazil a couple of years ago in Sao Paulo. It's called Capelli do Morumbi. And this was a former chapel that was converted into an art space. And it was such an amazing space that I thought, well, if I was going to put this exhibition on, this is totally the space I would want to use, because it's so unique. It has a lot of culture, a lot of history, but also the types of artists that have exhibited there have done really interesting things with this space. And so it was formerly a slave chapel, and it was restored in the 1940s. And now it's used for exhibitions and art events. And a lot of care was put into the reclamation of this building. And I thought that kind of contextualized this idea of reinterpreting the spiritual by actually putting it in a formerly spiritual building that is pretty much only used for contemporary art right now. And so this is a couple examples of some artists that have made pieces. Usually they only exhibit a single artist and they take up the whole space. And so I think these are mostly Brazilian artists. I got to see the Irã do Espírito piece when I was there. And he basically took up the whole back of the chapel. And here's kind of the layout, if you're looking at the space as a gallerist and kind of measuring everything, because I was able to download the specs. And so I was thinking of 5 artists that I thought could collectively interpret and put work into the space. And of these 5 artists, I selected specific works that I thought would work really beautifully together. So the first artist I chose was Elisa Schulte. I really love her wood tree sculptures. I do feel like there is a sense of spirituality, whether whether that's her intention. There's a lot of iconography in Asian religious paintings of the tree of life. So I kind of felt like this could be a contemporary tree of life, a much larger piece in that space. And the second artist that I selected was Marne Lucas, and she is known for her infrared photography. And I really, this particular series, Transmundane, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, to me sort of has a sort of cosmic connotations of spirituality, as well as documenting something that's the invisible, this idea of capturing something that we cannot see with our eyes, which is very much Hilma Af Klint's sort of interest as an artist. And especially this particular piece, I felt really has this sort of cosmic, goddess, Gaia, this universal energy ideas that could be interpreted as being spiritual or not. And there's also a tree in there. And then another artist that I selected was Vosjilav Radovanovic, I hope I pronounced it properly, who has done a lot of different media in his practice, moving image, sculpture, installation, and drawing. But the piece that I was really drawn to for this space is House for Ink sculpture. So I kind of imagine with Lisa's tree within the space having these hanging, suspended pieces that have some connotation of nature, of spirituality, but also some abstraction of those types of objects. I think that to me would be really interesting. And to speak to other things that could be religious, but may not be explicitly religious, I guess is the best way to put it. Dina Cline is another artist that I felt had this sort of non-symbolic representations of spirit in a series called Ascension. And I believe in this series, she does explicitly call them as spiritual paintings. But, that wasn't my criteria in terms of why I selected. To me, this speaks to the idea of spirit, the idea of the invisible, the idea of these ineffable energies that exist in the world that could be interpreted as pure abstraction or spirituality. So I felt this series really kind of fit what I was looking for in terms of work that gives both of that invisible and spiritual without, hitting you on the head with a cross or, some kind of religious symbiology. And then Val Kim's photography, I felt also has these ideas of searching for spirituality in the medium of photography. And see, these are some of the images from some work that she's done that I feel like has this sort of search for light, search for spiritual, that are kind of maybe more based in nature, which is where a lot of inspiration for a lot of artists who are working with spirit, in the non sort of organized religion space. And it's called Passing Notes. And I just love the sense of light and the sort of use of photography to do abstraction. And just the use of color and negative space. It feels very contemporary, but it still feels really trying to capture something that you can't really hold. There is that sense of invisible and ephemeral. And my whole idea with if I was given the budget and if we had all the money in the world is what would all of these artists together create in this space that I found that could be seen as more of an experience where there is elements of their work kind of blending into each other, you know, and I don't know what that would be, but I kind of saw the two-dimensional artist as maybe creating some kind of triptych in the back of the chapel, and then maybe the tree in the middle, and in the actual physical space around the tree, some of the hanging sculptures. But, you know, I am also like, artists have way better ideas than me, and maybe they would collaborate and come up with something that is in the vein of the works that I really like, that I thought would be cool in that space, but, you know, expand upon their practice, because the space is really huge, and the scale of that space, I feel like, could be really interesting to sort of imagine what another piece could be, and thinking of the space not so much as a gallery, but a spiritual, its own spiritual temple where, and place of inspiration. So maybe it would be more of like a site specific space to do a collective artwork that is a holistic piece, where you couldn't necessarily rip apart and saying, this is my part of the art piece and this is my part of the art piece, more like a theater production where, you know, all of these things come together. And I had a rendering of it that I was trying to get working that was interactive on 3D, but it was not, it was crashing and not working so hot. So I'm sorry, I can't share that, the rendering of what I was thinking, with you guys. And then I wanted to end with this quote: overcome your hostility to God and your personality, love of truth in relation to the tangible. And I just, you know, in the reading, my readings of her notes, which were all translated from Swedish, you know, her overarching theme of bringing the biology and the science and physics and her own spiritual practice, it always came to the sense of love and truth. And the fact that we can't really talk about God and spirituality in art without someone giving us a little side eye, like, really, you're gonna talk about, like, really truly talk about spirit and God? Like, I just don't see that happening a lot in contemporary art, and I'm wondering, like, well, why is that? And because so much of historical art has come from, you know, organized religion as well as, you know, inspiration, right? And why can't we critically talk about this idea of the invisible and spirit critically, you know? And I don't know, maybe it'll trend that way. It'll move away from the materialist and the object, the collecting of the object, and something that's more spiritual and more experiential for an audience. So yeah, thank you. And I'm
So
curious
Laurie,
if any of you, yes.
Yeah, quick question.
Yes.
And Marne actually put it in the chat, but I was thinking of it myself, is how would you see your work, and how would that connect to these other artists? Because I kind of know the answer, but it would be good for everyone else to hear that.
So for me, I think it's because I come from a filmmaking background. I would probably love to make a documentary of the pieces and the stories behind the collaboration, and document the actual making of and then the finished work, because it is a spatial piece that needs to be walked around. It needs to be kind of explored in space, and a lot of these type of installation works don't translate very well to a 2D medium. So I would see myself as creating the film that would represent and be the documentation of the piece.
It sounds great. I'm already racking my brain to see a space that you can do this in. Like, I'm just trying to think of, obviously we're not going to be able to go to Brazil anytime soon.
Yes.
But I mean, we do have access to a number of spaces here in Los Angeles and in Hawaii that I think would be very relevant, and I think really appropriate to put these artists together and have you curate it.
Cool. Well, that would be amazing. And I mean, I think, I mean, I work in many medium. I think about spirituality a lot in my own work, but I'm always really curious, you know, because I see spirit in people's art, and I'm like, well, I don't know if they meant it to be there, but I feel it and I see it. And, you know, when I've talked to some of these artists, when I mentioned that they were going to be part of it, you know, some of them said, yeah, I actually do intentionally put that in my work, but I don't say that in my artist statement. And so I thought that was pretty interesting that, you know, I don't know if there's like a shameful, like, oh, I don't want to be that weird woo-woo person talking about my work in like new age speak, or and I'm like, well, why is that? Like, why would someone feel uncomfortable about revealing that being part of the inspiration and process of the work?
And hey, Betty, can you unmute yourself for a sec?
I already did. I was going to ask a question. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, I wanted to get your take on on some of this too, especially in the context of the conversation that, or in the presentation you gave at the last happy hour. I feel like, you know, coming from how we transition to the artist explaining their experience compared to, you know, how you were talking about how this is all kind of translated over time, how this now works into all that.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. And first of all, thank you, Laurie. What an inspired curatorial proposal. I think that, first of all, that space, damn, that is so beautiful. I would love to curate a show there. I can see why that caught your interest. It's exquisite. If I were doing that show, I would not have all the artists contribute to one thing. I would have them do parts of it in their own language. My experience is that collaborations between 2 people are hard. Collaborations between 5 people are impossible. That's just my experience as a curator. But that's minor. What I would say is, Laurie, you could do this in any space. You could translate any gallery space into a chapel. I'm sure we all remember the whole Roscoe Chapel and the chapel in Taos. And I think one of the things I've remembered throughout my art history teaching is that when you survey people who go to an art museum and you ask them what the art museum experience was closest to in their lived world, they say church. Because there's this hushed sacredness in so many art galleries. Not always, and God knows there's a lot of work that is not sacred or not spiritual. That's, you know, a joke or you know, a protest of a academic tenure. Who knows? I mean, Hans Hockey does amazing work about how boards of directors have upped the price of paintings by putting them, you know, blah, 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 blah. Not everybody is spiritual, but a lot of people are. And I think, Laurie, that if you talk to a whole lot of contemporary artists and you talk to them, you know, with a trusting, respectful way, you would find that a lot of them do care about the spiritual. And a lot of them do work that they acknowledge as spiritual. So I think that whole thing of spirituality being poo-pooed is either very old-fashioned or mouthed by a bunch of jerks. But I'm looking at the people who are up on my screen right now because I just have my computer set up. So I see 5 people. Besides me and Andy and you, Laurie, I see Anne-Marie Rousseau and I see Catherine Rouet. And as God is my witness, I think both of their works are spiritual. And if I were to do a work, an exhibition about contemporary spiritual art, I would put both of them in it because it is, I think it's a very pervasive thing. In terms of it needing to be abstract, I think that for a long time, abstract art was intended to be spiritual. I mean, we know Kandinsky wrote a book called Concerning the Spiritual in Art, and we know that he intended abstraction to be a spiritual arm of the art world. And we also know that, you know, Malevich did his work to be spiritual. So there is this long and highly respected tradition of our contemporary art as spiritual. And if people who poo-poo that are just poo-poo. Just full on poo-poo. But I think that this is a brilliant assembly of people. And as much as we would all like to put it in that place in Brazil, I want to go there and like spend the night in that room. I mean, it's just gorgeous. I think you could take, say, one of the upstairs galleries at Andy's MOA and transform it into a chapel and get all those artists to contribute pieces that make that room another place, an altered reality, a deeper, and put out meditation pillows for God's sake, and get people to come in there and sit down and meditate on the art. I think the people you selected and your concept is so brilliant that you really could do it almost anywhere. I mean, yes, it'd be best at that place in Brazil, and I want to see it there. But given the realities of our world right now, I think you should just like talk to Andy. That's my two cents.
That's where I went straight there when she started, talking about this. I'm seeing this show and I'm thinking, well, I have access to a handful of really appropriate spaces here in California, and a handful of them in Hawaii too. So I could see this happening in San Francisco as well, New York too. So there are, I think, plenty of spaces that lend themselves towards this, that don't necessarily, the space itself is spiritual, but you could create that by the kind of unification of these artists, right? Like, for sure.
One of the last exhibitions that a renowned curator, not my favorite person, but renowned curator Maurice Tuckman did, was Spiritual in Art for the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And that was, let's say, 15, maybe 20 years ago. I mean, it was a while ago. And he assembled, I mean, Klimt was in it and Agnes Helton, but he also assembled a huge group of California artists who were all very happy to have their work called spiritual and all honored to be in that exhibition. So Laurie, if I were you, I'd look that up. I think it might have been called The Spiritual in Art as a play on that Kandinsky book, but it was at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. I'll look it up and I'll send it to you, Laurie, because I think that it's always good to know what people have got done who have trod the path that you're trotting. But Laurie, this is a effing brilliant idea. That group of people, the idea of the show, you need to make this happen outside of a Zoom.
Thank you so much.
A material reality.
Agreed.
And let me help you in any way I can, because it is, woohoo, it's fabulous.
Well,
fabulous.
I really took to heart of saying, I've never tried to curate something, so I wanted to do a good job. And I actually did read the Kandinsky book. And when I was doing research about, all the spiritual abstractionists, the abstract painters, and I heard about Klimt, I was kind of mad because I'm like, wait a minute, there's a good chance that Kandinsky might have stolen some of his ideas from her, because he was a much more well-known artist and he published that book. And so I originally was going to base the exhibition on his book, and then I learned about her and I saw the documentary about her, and I'm like, okay, no, it's going to be this woman artist who is ignored and not recognized, and her ideas were so much went to even science, which I thought was so fascinating, because she was but that the majority of the writings about her did not talk about that stuff. So
well, in fairness to Kandinsky,
yeah,
who, is not my favorite person or anything, but her work was not known at the time. I mean, what was the date you gave? She started working on this stuff in 1906?
Yeah, I think the last series was 1906, but I think so. She met with him before that. So this was one of her later paintings, the paintings for the temple. So she started the series in 1906, but she'd been doing these types of paintings that predate Kandinsky, and that she had met him, and there was another person that she'd met because she was exhibited in Sweden.
Right.
Yeah.
But the avant-garde was happening in France at the time, so they didn't know about her.
Yes.
I'm not excusing them. I'm just saying that, and I want to say one more thing about Kandinsky being the first abstractionist. That's just bullshit. Native Americans have been doing abstract art forever. Islamic artists have been working in spiritually abstract art for centuries. So she may be the first abstract artist in the avant-garde tradition of Western culture, but many other cultures practiced abstraction for millennia. And we need to remember that that has always been part of art, even if it kind of got pushed out by the Catholic Church that privileged figurative work so highly. I mean, I'm not criticizing Catholic Church. I love all the artists they sponsored. I mean, give me Caravaggio any day, always, day and night, always. I love his work that much. And I love a lot of artists who work for the Catholic Church. I'm not, God bless the Catholic Church. It brought us the Baroque. Yeah. But the abstraction of Native Americans is significant and wonderful. And if you do this, I would hope that you could, in some point, maybe in your statement or something, make sure that you're clear that you're talking about her as the first abstractionist in Western culture, not in the world.
Yes, definitely.
But that's just my little art historical, 2 cents. I think it's an unbelievably exciting project. And I mean, I'm jealous I didn't think of it. And I mean that sincerely. And I've curated, as you all know, for longer than most of you have been alive.
Betty?
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about what she did with her art in terms of her legacy, leaving behind in her will that the work could not be split up, never be shown except all together, and they were these giant paintings. Maybe when you do your wonderful presentation that's coming about leaving a legacy with your art and how to do that.
I'm not doing a lecture on that. Andrew's organizing a panel. I'm not going to even be part of it, but thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, I know you know the answer to that question about how that impacted her standing and everything to say this work can't be split up. It's the same, I mean, it kind of happened with Van Gogh, and then who's the other guy that has the museum in the Midwest that said his work couldn't be split up? Oh,
Clifford Still.
Clifford Still, yeah. Do you know anything?
But interestingly, Anne Marie, we've all heard of Clifford Still and Van Gogh.
Yes, we have.
So whatever they did or didn't do vis-a-vis their legacy, has not impacted their fame in the modern era.
Yeah.
I agree that saying, the work has to be all shown together or not shown at all is putting a huge limitation on it.
Mm-hmm.
Anne-Marie, have you ever been to Marfa?
Somehow your voice went way, way down. Is it just me?
Have you ever been to Marfa?
Oh, no, I've never been to Marfa.
Well, the whole point of Marfa is Donald Judd didn't want his work to be shown except under his controlled situation.
Yeah, yeah.
And he knew a lot of artists who felt the same way.
Yeah.
So there are people out there who follow in her footsteps.
Actually, every artist feels that way. Some can do it and some can't.
Yeah,
get away with it anyway.
To buy an army base to put their art in, right?
Yeah.
Back to Laurie. Laurie, this is such a great concept. And I don't know if you know, well, surely you know what Palm Springs is, right? I mean, I don't know if you've ever been, but you know what Palm Springs is. Their museum right now has an exhibition that you should really see because this artist should be in your show. Her name is Agnes Helton.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, of course.
I know her from my PhD is from the University of New Mexico, so I spent a lot of time in New Mexico and Santa Fe and Albuquerque, and she's from Taos. So she's an extraordinary spiritual abstract artist, and I just think you might like her as much as you like Klint. Mm-hmm. You really might. I mean, I like her.
Thank you for the recommendation. I'm always interested in finding new artists to check out.
At the Palm Springs Desert, I think it's Desert Museum. Is that right, Andy?
Yes. Yeah, it's not at the main Palm Springs Museum. It's at the desert, Palm Desert Museum. It's Palm Springs Museum, but their Palm Desert location.
So I think that if you decide you want to do this and you get a big enough venue, there might be several people that you could add to it that would fit in just completely perfectly. So I
Absolutely.
say, talk to Andy, get her to help you find a venue, because that's her expertise. And boy, she's a superstar at it. This show should be done, Laurie. This show should be done.
I agree. I think it totally should be done. Yeah.
I'm muting now. Bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you, Betty.
Thank you, Betty. That was really amazing and inspiring because I've never curated anything before. So I went a little crazy just the research because I thought, well, I should know I should try to learn and, have a curatorial statement that is interesting and distinctive to like the things I'm interested in, passionate about, but also try to do something that hasn't been done and with Kipaipai artists. So yeah, I bought a whole bunch of books and read a lot. That's why it took me so long.
I wish every curator was that committed.
Yep. The research is so important, right? Because we think about it and we're like, oh, how it looks, or, visually, what experience do we have with these artists together? But when you really think what curation is supporting a thesis, and that not starting, these things look good together and then calling it a show, but really thinking about what that thesis is, and then pulling together the ideas from others' work. And that's exactly what you did here with the research is support a thesis. And that's really important. That's what makes a good show. Does anyone else have any questions?
I just have one comment real quick, and that is to thank you, Laurie, for presenting or putting your foot forward in the realm of spiritualism, because in this funny world and, with people being agnostic or whatever, atheist, I have a son who's super science, and so he's decided he doesn't believe in God anymore. And I see whatever it is everywhere. And thank you for sticking your foot out there and saying, wait a minute, here, yeah, there is some kind of spiritualism. It's not a religion. It's not a doctrine. It's just something we all experience at one moment or another in our life. And, it takes bravery actually to do this. So thank you. And furthermore, like Andy said, this is a show that you got to do.
Yeah.
There's so many artists you can include too.
I did want to invite the artists who are here because I told them what my project was, because I said, well, this isn't an exhibit where I would just take those pieces and stick it in a space. I just found the pieces that I thought represented the theme, but if they were going to do it bigger or like without unlimited fun, like to try to dream big of like how work, sharing the space with these other artists, how we some of the ideas they might have. And that was something that I wasn't like, it doesn't have to be in the proposal, but I wanted to be clear in saying this isn't just like collecting these pieces and sticking it. It's more about these are the pieces that inspired me to choose you for this, but how you would maybe create something new or grow your, scale or grow or expand what the work you're already doing. I kind of left that as a question. So if a couple of them did email me back, but I wanted you guys to be able to share your thoughts now that I've done the presentation and had time to think.
Vosjilav, you want to go first?
Hey, hi, I'm so grateful and this beautiful present. Thank you so much. I agree with Catherine, what Catherine said, and Betty. And this is really like important to talk about spiritualism and spiritual practice. Actually, my artistic practice become my spiritual practice at the same time, and I'm pretty sure with a lot of artists that's the case. And I can see actually more artists. I agree with Betty completely. There should be like a bigger number of artists, and wow, that space is really amazing. But this is great team. I also wanted to ask you, are you familiar with theosophic philosophy? and Christina Blavatsky, because I believe that she was actually big inspiration both for Hilma and all abstraction circle were very into theosophy. So if you haven't read anything about that's like really something that I recommend.
I did read a little bit about the formal practices of, in her philosophy and the I can't say the word, but yes, because they mention it in her biography, and I'm like, what the heck is that? And I googled it, Wikipedia'd it.
It was obviously very influential movement, and there is like a lot of artists following that, but also hiding themselves that they are practicing theosophy. So that's kind of like the same maybe situation right now when, like you mentioned, that people are almost kind of like embarrassed to combine art with spirituality, because art becomes so commercialized and influenced by that, like is it good investment attitude. So this is really refreshing. Right now I'm curating show with Jason Jen at Angel's Gate. I don't know if you had the chance to look at it, but we have like also 3D presentation, and I'm inviting all of the artists also to check it out. So yeah, I'm very grateful for being part of this selection. Thank you.
Marne, you want to say something?
Hi there. Thank you, Laurie. Wow. I'm quite honored. And I have to say, some of the conversations that Laurie and I had, we were driving from New York City up to Kipaipai in upstate New York, or maybe it was on the way back. It was on the way up there. And so we were talking about our work, and Laurie was really one of the first people to point out that my work was not so much about this infrared technology used by border or aerial surveillance. I'd been sort of focusing on that as a way to sort of frame my work in a way that sort of justified using that technology, but that isn't what the work is about. And Laurie pointed out that it really was more about spirit and angels and, afterlife. And ever since that conversation in the car, it's really changed my view of my own work. So I'm really grateful, because I do feel like I was sort of using the idea of the technology as sort of like a crutch and not wanting to fully embrace the spiritual. I mean, I'm in New York City, I'm an Oregonian, I spend my time in Oregon and Hawaii, and I am woo-woo, and I get a lot of crap for that in New York all the time. And so I think I was sort of like relying on the technology, and that's not what that work is about. So I really appreciate our conversations, and it has really changed how I'm pursuing this body of work. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful.
Dina, are you there?
I'm here. I'm in an Uber. What I want to say is, first, thank you. Second, if I had an endless budget, I would put those clouds all over an entire room, and everybody would just have to be in it. And then also I would make a trampoline that had the same clouds on them, and then you'd fall back on the trampoline and just like bounce in heaven. And the other thing I want to say is that I think it's a really cool project, because I think for me personally, spirituality usually in my mind, for whatever reason, kind of negates intellectual capacity to some degree. So I often don't really like to bring in spirituality into my work, even if it's there sort of secretly, because I don't want to seem unintelligent or yeah. So I just think it was a really nice presentation, and I'm very proud to be a part of it, and thankful that it got put into this very beautiful historical context that kind of takes, I don't know if it takes the woo-woo out of it, but just intellectualizes the woo-woo a little bit. So thank you, and I'm gonna mute now and put my mask back on so my Uber driver doesn't get mad at me.
Thanks, Dina. Do we have any of the other artists here? I feel like I maybe missed somebody. No? Okay.
Lisa said she couldn't make it.
Okay.
And then I don't see Val.
Yeah, I don't see Val either. All right. All right. Well, thank you, Laurie. This was amazing. We're going to obviously have
Wait,
a
I'm sorry, I'm
further
interrupting.
conversation.
Andy,
Oh, go ahead, Betty.
I just want to interrupt and say, I just found a link about the spirituality show at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. It's a review by Hilton Kramer. And so I am going to put that in the chat. Maybe I should just put it, you know what, I'll just put it on.
Yeah, just drop it in the chat. Everybody could grab it from there.
I can't get it to copy into the chat.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I'll put it on I'm an Artist.
okay.
But
That'd be great.
it's 1890 to 1985, and as I said, it has Klimt is in that show. So I'm putting it on I'm an Artist right now.
Thanks, Betty.
Okay.
And of course, you and I, Laurie, will be continuing this conversation offline because I do agree this needs to happen. And yeah, I do know a few places we could show this.
Thank you. Thank you for the challenge of trying to curate
Yeah,
something, because
no,
I
it
would have
turned out
never done
great.
this otherwise, because I'm like, I don't know how to curate. I don't have that background. But it was an interesting process just to kind of and I do feel like I have a better understanding of what curators have to do now, and it was a good exercise. So
Yeah,
I appreciate the challenge.
well, you did great.
Plus, you're going to now do it for real. So
Yeah.
you're going to be a curator.
Yes. Yes. So right before we say goodbye today, I also wanted to just bring up that, because, you know, I can shamelessly self-promote here on this platform with all of you. I'd love to support our fellow Kipaipai Kudra Clover, who has her show opening at MOA. Yay, on June 5th. So hopefully you all can make a trip up and spend the night, come to the opening on the 5th and then spend the night. And then we're gonna have a little, I think, brunch in my backyard on Sunday the 6th. So let me know if you're heading this way so I can get some count some people and get some numbers and organize some food. And in the meantime, come up and support Kudra and see her beautiful show. And we'll be very excited to see all of your faces. I know some of you are coming in from out of town. I know Marne is flying in from New York. So if she can do that, then those of you who live within an hour drive can get in your car and drive up here. So.
And don't forget to wear red.
Right. You must wear
Well,
red.
I'm coming
And
from
if you
San
look behind me,
Diego.
here's a sneak preview. We're still at the museum.
Everybody else should come. I'm coming from San Diego, so come
That's
on,
right.
you guys.
I'm
Be
coming
there.
from Newport Beach, so,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a really great,
Yep.
the show is amazing. You're all going to, your minds are going to be blown.
You guys look behind me. So we're at the museum still setting up. This is a little sneak preview of the installation, the interactive installation. Can you see it?
Whoa, very cool.
It's great.
Yeah.
So, Andy,
Yes.
can you give the dates for the Mill Valley Kaipai?
Yes. So Mill Valley is full. It is August 6th through 8th. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday. If you are participating, you need to be there by 3 o'clock on August 6th for check-in, and then we'll have a welcome cocktail hour and dinner, and then we'll get started first thing Saturday morning right after breakfast. And it'll be very similar for those of you who attended New York and Joshua Tree. The format will be very similar. You'll be broken into 2 groups. That will be your kind of immediate cohort during the, and then you'll have your 30-minute one-on-ones with the faculty. Let's see.
Can you send the address of the?
Oh no, you'll get stuff in the.
I want to make airline reservations as soon as possible. I don't know where I'm going, but.
Oh, you're going to just Mill Valley. You can either fly into San Francisco or Oakland.
Oh, okay. That's.
It's just north of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Okay.
Yeah, by Sausalito. Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. But next week,
Hey,
obviously,
Andy,
we will not be having. Yes, Stevie.
could you repeat? I was zoning out and I totally missed what's happening on June 6th. Something really fun is happening with Kudra on June 6th. What's
Yeah,
that?
so her opining at MOA is June 5th. And then on June 6th,
Right.
that Sunday, we're gonna get to, our Kipaipai fellows will get together and have a little brunch at my house in the backyard.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you. I'm glad
Okay, all right, I'll
got
give
that
you guys all
repeated.
more information later. And that's pretty much it. We will not have a meeting next week because most of us that are a lot of us here will be at an event, our Sunset Soiree, which is our big fundraiser, our first fundraiser back after the pandemic. And some of you will be there, and then we'll have the opening the next day, and then Kipaipai brunch the following day. So thank you all for showing up. And then June 11th will be Betty's part 2 of Understanding Abstraction, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Laurie.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye,
Laurie.
everyone.
Aloha.
Bye.
Awesome,
Thanks.
Laurie. Congrats.
Thanks very much for coming.
Thanks, Lori.
Bye.